by master glass cutter Peter O'Rourke. At this time, Tricia and I would be really pleased and delighted if the four of you, the President and First Lady and Vice President Ms. Cheney, would join us to take a look in just a moment at these special shades. Please come over.
Well, there you go. So they're presenting those. The First Lady there with Senator from Mississippi and Lynn Cheney and the Vice President and the President. They're all up there to get the hurricanes. Let's listen and see if any of these guys say anything.
Thank you, Senator Lott, Senator and Senator Dodd. Congratulations on hosting this wonderful occasion this day. Certainly goes down to the annals of history, and it was very, very finely done. On behalf of the Congress, the House of Representatives and Senate, we'd like to present to President Bush, Mrs. Bush, Vice President Cheney, and Mrs. Cheney, two flags that were flown over the Capitol today in your honor as you were being inaugurated. This place, this hall, has seen many great men pass through these portals, go back and forth. This group of people, this contingent of folks that are here today, have added to that legacy of history. It's very fitting that we pass these flags on to you with our great gratitude for your service and well wishes for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the Vice President and I have other roles now, but at heart we'll always be house guys. You know that. As your program indicates, a vision of America has been selected as this year's inaugural theme to commemorate the bicentennial of Lewis and Clark expedition reaching the Pacific and the 100th anniversary of President Roosevelt. After all, at the beginning of our new presidential term, it's altogether proper that we stop to appreciate and draw inspiration from that past. As Teddy Roosevelt once said, far better it is to dare to do mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much or suffer much. For they live in the great twilight that knows not a victory nor defeat. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to join me, stand, and raise your glass to the man that will lead this country. A man that will lead this country in accordance with the best traditions of bold American leadership, vision, courage, and conviction. To the 43rd President of the United States of America, George W. Bush.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, sir. Senator Trent Lott, thanks for being such a great organizer. This part of this day has gone incredibly well, and I appreciate your hard work, Senator Dodd, Senator Frist, other distinguished members of the Congress, and some who aren't quite so distinguished. It's an honor to be here. I really want to thank you for your hospitality. Laura and I are grateful for your gifts and grateful for your wonderful hospitality. What a day, and what a special lunch. We really appreciate you having us. I appreciate the justices of the Supreme Court being here. I want you to know how touched I was that Chief Justice came to administer the oath. That was an incredibly moving part of the ceremony. I want to thank the members of my cabinet who are here. I appreciate General Myers, who is here, and I want to thank all my friends from Texas who have come. I'm surprised that some were able to, penetrate the security. But I appreciate you coming. I'm really proud of Dick Cheney, my vice president. He is a fabulous man, a man of sound judgment and great character, and I'm honored to serve with you, Dick. I want to thank President Carter and Mrs. Carter for coming, and President Clinton and Senator Clinton for joining us today. It means a lot that both former presidents were here. I thank you very much for your presence. I'm also really happy another former president is with us. That would be my dad. Thanks for coming. And mother. I appreciate Barbara and Jenna. I love them dearly. I thank them for joining the campaign trail. It was like the camping trip I promised to take them on and never did. I want to thank my brothers and sisters. They have meant a lot to me. Their unconditional love is an important part of keeping perspective here in the nation's capital. I am impressed by this inaugural ceremony. It is a magnificent event. I think any president who's ever been through one, if able to step back and say, what an impressive moment, not in my life, but in the life of the country. It reminds us that we serve a cause larger than ourselves. We have one country, one Constitution, and one future that binds us. As leaders, we have a common duty to achieve results for the people regardless of our political parties. There's important work to be done, and I look forward to working with members of both houses and both parties to achieve that job. We have a solemn duty to protect our people and to win the war on terror, and we will. We have other vital duties, and we will strive to achieve results on behalf of the people. I'm eager for the work. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are as well. I'm looking forward to putting my heart and soul into this job for 4 more years. Together we can make this great nation of ours a safer place and a freer place and a better place for all our fellow citizens. May God bless you all, and may God continue to bless our great land.
So the president's spoken, everybody's gotten gifts. Trent Lott is back up there in just a minute. And you know what all of this means. The important thing about all of this is that in a minute they'll begin the parade. Because out here in front of the White House, it's cold. And they've been bringing, I don't know if we can show you what it's like out here, but you see the presidential seal back over there. Well, all down below down there, thousands of people have gathered. They've brought in dozens and dozens of buses. And they've all been sitting around waiting for the parade to begin while they, make nice with each other over there in the Capitol. So there's this dude on an overhead speaker thing out here who's been asking people to answer trivia questions. Trivia questions like how many matches are in a packet of matches, and And what else, Rich Lowry?
20 matches, by the way.
20 matches.
Chef.
It is the red stripe at the top of the flag, and the green and the stoplight, is that at the bottom or the top? That's what we've been treated to while you were watching the president get hurricane lanterns from the Senate. So in a minute, we'll have the parade, and the marching bands will come, and in the meantime, Trent Lott is speaking, the Republican from Mississippi. Let's listen back to him.
And to conclude the program, I call on the chaplain of the House of Representatives, Father Daniel Coughlin, who will deliver the benediction. If you will remain in your seats when he concludes his prayer so that the official party can leave the room. Thank you very much.
Let us pray. Lord our God, we have been blessed and are celebrating freedom and honoring the service of George W. Bush as President and Richard B. Cheney as Vice President of the United States of America. Endow them with your Holy Spirit, Lord. We are blessed as a free nation where power is passed on generation after generation. For in a democracy, power is attributed by the people, for the people. Bless us as we move forward now, realizing that all power given from above is safeguarded by you and accountable to you, now and forever. Amen.
There you go. The President and the First Lady are leaving after the speeches and the congratulations and the exchanging of gifts and promises for the future. President Bush giving a shoulder five there as Trent Lott leads him out. Now they'll go out the east front of the Capitol where they'll begin this military review. And as was mentioned a short time ago, this will be the first sort of, kiss for mom. You better kiss mom on the way out of there. President Bush talks about the great influence that his mother has been throughout. In fact, when he talked about his bluntness, again with Rich Lowry of the National Review and Cece Connolly of the Washington Post with me here on the reviewing stand, he kissed Barbara Bush there, and he talked about his bluntness and how so much of that came from his mother. His bluntness of we want him dead or alive, and the bluntness of what were a couple of the other ones?
Bring him on.
Bring him on, which didn't go over too well. He said that came from mom.
It does come from his mom, and it's a double-edged sword because that kind of plain-spoken bluntness is one of the reasons he can connect pretty well with people. On the other hand, it gets him in trouble because occasionally it's not in keeping with the dignity of the office.
You know, it's interesting, in those brief remarks after the luncheon, the president paid homage to his parents, and this must be a very, very special moment for former President Bush.
Oh, it's gotta be. Are you kidding me?
41 as we call him, because of course he did not win a second term, and there was some question about whether or not that was going to be the curse of the Bush family. And indeed it was not.
You know, not to disagree with you, Cece, but I figured today maybe Bush 41 isn't Bush 41. He's just daddy.
Just dad.
And daddy's sitting up there, and his son has led the world into a war that a lot of people didn't think much of. His opinion is up enough to where he gets reelected as President of the United States. His other son's sitting down there in Florida and has just guided them through 4 horrible crises where his popularity could have plummeted, and instead his sons are 2 of the biggest dudes on the planet. He must be beaming with pride as a father.
An incredibly proud father, and as we know, a sentimental man. And you've seen that in his face again today. We see the Capitol clearing out there pretty quickly now. They're getting ready to get into those new limousines. There's former President Clinton, Senator Edward Kennedy. That was Senator Kennedy next to him. I did not recognize the woman.
And there's Barbara Bush after her kiss. Rich Lowry, that's a tight bunch in there with the granddaughters who, as we've been mentioning on the broadcast network today, are hosting the biggest party in town tonight. If you don't have a ticket to the daughters' dance tonight, you are nobody.
Now you make me feel badly, Chef.
I'm a nobody.
We don't have none of
both
are.
We're all nobodies.
Three of us.
Yeah.
You were talking about 41 and how on a day like this he's just a daddy. And actually, whenever 41 is asked about his relationship to W and any advice he gives him, and does he tell him to go into Iraq or not, he constantly comes back to exactly that point. He's a father. His role is to be there when needed. Otherwise, he's not giving him any special high-level advice.
Andy Card, the chief of staff, getting in the vehicle there, as you may have noticed. There was a lot of speculation about whether Andy Card might get a new job under a W-2 administration. It quickly became clear that it wasn't. And this morning, as Andy Card made the rounds on the cable channels, he said this is a great day for freedom. And clearly, it is freedom on which President Bush has focused throughout the day. Not the possibility that freedom won't spread, but waiting for the day when all of those around the planet have their freedom. There's 41 and Barbara and walking, and the former First Lady walking out of the Capitol. Start calling her by her first name, we're going to get emails, complaints. No disrespect at all.
Chef, you mentioned Andy Card, and that's one of the extraordinary things about this president and his team, is just the intense loyalty and how little turnover there is. Once someone is in Bush's inner circle the way Andy Card is, or someone like Condoleezza Rice or Karen Hughes or Karl Rove, they don't go anywhere, and there's very little backbiting, very little internal division.
Tom Ridge, who's making his way out now. Where is Tom Ridge in the pecking order now? Tom Ridge, who's on his way out and had a lot of detractors along the way, former governor of Pennsylvania, who a lot of people said, quite frankly, was in over his head.
Well, that was such a tough job, not only because you live every moment in fear of another attack, but also because he had the responsibility of putting together that brand new, massive Department of Homeland Security. There you see Condoleezza Rice, the incoming Secretary of State.
Well, after they give her the okay. But yeah, she's coming.
That's right. I was about to say that the Senate is expected to vote on her confirmation next week. She just finished 2 long days of confirmation hearings.
Senator Kennedy and Bill Clinton, and you wonder where the divide is there. There were a lot of questions about, let's face it, the Kennedys and the Kerrys of Massachusetts have never been tight. That it's not their reputation that they have been fighting from the same corner. And then there's Bill Clinton there, and lots of questions about...
Shep, one of the things that was so interesting about Campaign 2000 was the bond that was forged between Senator Kennedy and Senator John Kerry. There had always been a lot of competition and tension between the two of them and their camps, but perhaps no one worked harder for John Kerry in this past campaign than Ted Kennedy.
It was interesting to see. It really was.
They became much closer throughout that experience.
A lot of people wondered if this was true or political face, Rich Lowry.
Well, that's true. Just Bill Clinton, though, it's always fun to see him at these events, because they said of Teddy Roosevelt that he wanted to be the corpse at every funeral and the groom at every wedding. And there's really that aspect of Bill Clinton, too. And I'd be shocked as not part of him that's not chomping at the bit to be giving the speech today and being the center of attention the way he was.
Impossible, Dan Quayle, impossible not to remember 4 years ago at this very time, we were sitting in just about this very place. The rains had stopped. Former President Clinton then was inside a hangar reviewing the troops and making the rounds, and for hours on end he shook hands, sort of not walking into the sunset at all, but sort of triumphantly passing into the next level of his life. That was an interesting day.
And of course, you have this President Bush just recently chapped President Clinton and his father to lead the relief effort for the tsunami victims. So once again, they'll be back in the public eye to some extent. You're looking at Senator Hatch over there on the right-hand side of your television screen, Debbie Dingell, the wife of Congressman Dingell from Michigan.
And there was a painting on the wall, just, so that we remembered it was there.
Yes, I think we learned from Senator Lott a little earlier that was a Lewis and Clark painting in keeping with a commemoration that's going on this year. That's outgoing Secretary Tom Ridge. And that's Harry Reid, the new Senate Minority Leader, after, of course, Tom Daschle was defeated.
And how does that play in the new Congress? A Harry Reid minority versus a Tom Daschle minority?
Well, this is a big question facing the Democrats, is what posture they take towards President Bush. They try to work with him and influence his proposed legislation in their direction, or are they more frankly obstructionist and confrontational? And Republicans think Daschle was more obstructionist, and they made him pay a price. And they're hoping that Democrats will learn a lesson from that. But there's a big internal debate within the Democratic Party about what lesson to learn from this last election, and therefore what posture to take going forward.
And Harry Reid is an interesting selection for that role, in part, Shep, because some of his views are in contrast to most in his party. He, of course, is an anti-abortion, pro-gun senator from the state of Nevada, and yet he is very popular among his members. And it's often been said about some of those congressional leadership jobs that it's a lot like trying to herd cats. So a big part of it comes down to personal relationships and one-on-one how they can work together.
And we'll see. It will certainly be an interesting beginning. Often the press corps and the people, to a large degree, really give a president a little bit of time. It's not like the first 100 days you get in the beginning of a first term, but you get a little time to sort of reset yourself. We'll see how that process plays out in the next few weeks. Of course, he's not going to get a lot of time, because dominating the news after today most likely will be the elections in Iraq, which are 10 days from today, the build up toward those, the violence which has already been promised by this administration and others, and there you see Jimmy Carter. I believe, at least, it looks like from behind, it looks like Jimmy. Is that Jimmy Carter? Jimmy Carter, who has been, well, sort of vocal opponent along the way. Let's go to Charles Krauthammer on that. Charles Krauthammer in our Washington newsroom, a Fox News contributor. The way that Jimmy Carter has shaped the relationship between this president and his presidency, his alignment with Michael Moore along the way, how has that been received, Charles?
Well, I think it is, as you point out, rather historically new, where you get a former president who's actually acting as the leader of the opposition. That hasn't really happened in a very long time. And Carter, I think, is in some way trying to undo his legacy. He did not have a very successful presidency. People have said he's had the most successful post-presidency ever, and in a sense, probably so, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think he really has done, in some ways, a disservice to his country because of the way that he's been attacking the president, even while he's abroad. And I think that is really a little bit beyond what we ought to expect from a revered former president.
What about people from his own party, many of whom share some of his disdain for the way in which President Bush has governed and led us into war? Is he trying to make more friends among those, or your thoughts?
I think he's looking towards history. I don't think he's looking towards relationships with existing members of Congress. I think he wants to make his stand. He wants to be remembered as the man of peace who won the prize, who believed in it while he was president, although he was not that successful, especially in the Cold War, and wants to set down a marker as a man who spoke out against Iraq and other what he considers adventures. So I think he's sort of staking out his position for the eye of history rather than for contemporaries.
Whether by design or not, President Bush staking himself out for history today as well. His ideas are big and bold. His objectives are clear. Freedom must spread. For our freedom to remain, freedom must spread around the world. He's made it clear that that's his objective today. The risk of failure is not just about legacy here, but potentially about the fall of societies. And President Bush made it clear today that he believes if freedom does not spread, our freedom is in jeopardy.
Well, it was a revolutionary speech in that sense, and the closest echo is to really John Kennedy's speech, his inaugural address, where he talked about, in fact, there's a phrase in this inaugural which is an allusion to a famous phrase in Kennedy's. Kennedy spoke of bearing any burden to assure the survival and success of liberty, and President Bush said that in order to ensure survival of liberty at home, we have to have the success of liberty abroad, which was a interesting allusion to that speech. The idea is the same. Kennedy spoke in the Cold War and said, only if we stand for the liberty that we have at home, stand for that abroad, will we succeed against communism and secure our liberty at home. And the president is saying, in this struggle against another existential enemy, which is radical Islam and terrorism, we have to spread the democracy as the only realistic way of changing the culture out of which 9/11 emerged. And that's a very strong theme, of course. It has a lot of opposition at home and abroad, but it is extremely revolutionary to speak essentially about the abolition of tyranny, which has been a constant in human history for thousands of years, can only be spoken of as radical.
Going forward, Charles, for this president, 10 days from today, Iraqis hold their election, and then just a few short days later, what would normally, in a non-presidential election year, be a State of the Union address, this time an address to the joint session of Congress and the nation. What's the message that day as we move forward from this freedom must spread? What's the president's next message?
Today he gave the theme, and in the State of the Union he'll give the details. The theme today was democracy abroad and ownership society, a new understanding of liberty at home, a way to take the old great programs like Social Security and to make them more relevant to a new age, a new century, an aging population. So that was the theme. The details will be in the State of the Union, where he'll talk about one program after another. And I think in speaking about his our mission abroad, he'll talk specifically about Iraq, Afghanistan, the Arab-Israeli dispute, essentially the area where we are most seriously engaged, which is the Middle East, the Arab world, because of 9/11. I think that's going to be the substance of the details.
Charles Krauthammer, live in our Washington newsroom. Charles, always good to hear from you. Thank you. The first daughters now getting into their chariot for the ride over to the reviewing stand. You saw President Bush 41 and his wife as well making their way to the car. Since they went into the Capitol for the lunch and all the rest of it, it's gotten considerably colder out. The sun was out and the wind had died down during the president's official inauguration. Then they went in for lunch and that took the sun away and the wind came out. So they're going to find it much colder this afternoon, though on the reviewing stand they are behind plate glass windows, bulletproof windows, and I'm sure there's some heat in there, which must be nice. Their network is throwing around the dollars more than ours is today.
Send blankets.
So, where do we go now? Let's go to the Rotunda, the Capitol Rotunda, and Senator Harry Reid, the incoming Senate Minority Leader, House Minority Leader, about whom we're speaking, Senate Minority Leader, I am all over the place today, about whom we were speaking just a short time ago, of course, took over for Tom Daschle. Senator, great to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Shepard.
Was speaking with Cece Connolly just a moment ago, and she described you quite accurately as the Democrat who is pro-gun and anti-abortion, and was wondering, how is this man the leader of the minority in the Senate?
Is that a question?
That was her wonder, and I thought maybe you might be able to answer it for her.
Well, I think that it indicates the Democrats have a very broad tent. We have a very unified caucus, but people have lots of different views. And that's the message that we're going to take to the American people the next couple of years.
When you look back on the election, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because we've already done enough of that, but was the election assigned to Democrats that it's time to come to the center, or was the election assigned to Democrats that it's time to move to the left? Those are pretty much the only two options. If you stay the same, you've proven twice that doesn't work.
Well, Shepard, I would disagree with I don't think that those are the options. I think the options are that we have to do a better job in rural America. In rural America, we basically did not campaign. Take Nevada as an example. 91% of the registered voters are in Reno and Las Vegas. And Kerry did great in those two counties. But 9% of the people of the state of Nevada, the rural counties, the cow counties as we call them, overwhelmingly supported George Bush. As a result of that, Kerry lost Nevada by 2%. That is the way it was all over America. Now, the vice president came to a place like Elko, Nevada twice during the campaign, and a lot of people, a lot of political pundits said, why is he wasting his time doing that? The reason he was doing it is, in hindsight, is he was appealing to the people in rural America, rural Nevada. and we're just going to have to be seen in rural America. We do that, our message, we're better on every issue for rural America, but they have to hear it from us.
Senator, is it that you weren't there and campaigning there collectively, or that your message did not resonate there in small towns and rural communities across the center of the country?
I believe we did not take the message there. The presidential campaign was just a few states, and frankly, we didn't do what we should have done in the rest of America, and we need to do that. Physical presence is everything, and we had no physical presence. Our message is fine. You know, the next 4 years, of course, messages change just like the country changes, but there's nothing wrong with our message. What's wrong is we need to let the American people know how we stand on issues.
Senator, the president's message seemed to be for freedom to survive and for freedom to continue, freedom must spread to other parts of the world, that ours is a noble cause, that the actions that have been taken were proper, and that to back out would be disastrous. Is that a message with which Democrats can agree, and is that a place where we can find some ability to work together?
I think that we have to recognize in the world today is we have a relatively small number of very evil people. We can't do diplomatic things with them, we can't educate them, we can't talk to them, we can't hold conferences. They're basically people that have to be captured or frankly killed. Small number of people, but the problem we have in the world today is that there are millions of people who are sympathizing with these very evil people. Those are the people we need to appeal to, because we can educate, we can have diplomatic relations, we can do things to soften their view of what America is all about. And that's where our attention has to go.
Senator Harry Reid, good of you to come. Thanks so much, the incoming minority leader. See you soon. All right, well, we're still waiting for the parade, which by my calculation should have begun about 30 minutes ago. It's going to go on for about 2 hours, and as you can see, they're waiting for all to come out of the east front of the Capitol and then make their way over to the reviewing stand here, where thousands have lined up, and parade should get underway shortly. It's good to have you with us on Fox News Channel. We're back in a couple of minutes with continuing coverage. The president about to walk out of the Capitol building. That's the back of his head there, and the First Lady on your left. General Jackson there on the back, I believe it is. Looks like anyway. General Jacqueline there, and then Trent Lott in the background there, and his wife. And they'll all be coming out. They're sort of getting instructions. I think we can hear this. Let's listen.
Move out straight past the call center. Slide to the left.
Yeah, that's right.
Sir, you will follow them. Right side of the call. Senator Dodd, you move to the left side of the call.
You know what this is like? That's like the wedding planner. Remember, you know what I mean? That's like the wedding planner. You're about to walk down the aisle, and the wedding planner comes up and explains to you exactly how it's going to happen. Except instead of the bride being in charge here today, it's the groom. President.
Or a general.
Yes.
Years.
Yes.
You know, we take so much of this pomp and circumstance for granted here in Washington, but it really is planned out down to the second. And it also follows strict protocol, Shep, in terms of who rides in which vehicles, in the order in the motorcade, and who gets to sit where out here. Everything has been ticketed for this parade. You can't just wander on down to Pennsylvania Avenue and grab yourself a spot. We're very fortunate. We've got probably the best seat in town, even though it's a little bit chilly.
Except that we keep our backs to it.
Well, I'm going to keep turning around and get a peek at things. You could probably also hear us overhead. There are helicopters. Of course, that's part of the tight security here in in Washington. We can see snipers on rooftops all around us here in downtown. As you can see, those dignitaries are lining up now in very precise order, heading out of the Capitol.
And out they go. So a view from the east front, I guess that is. Rich, it's been turned around, I guess. All of this procession has been turned around since Ronald Reagan moved it to the west, because his words for it at the time were he comes from the west and he wanted to be able to see home. But it's a beautiful venue.
And Reagan's second inaugural, we're complaining a little bit about the weather conditions here, especially when the sun goes behind the clouds and it feels as though it drops about 20 degrees. But Reagan's second inaugural parade was actually canceled because of the frigid temperatures. And Shep, it's worth noting there are people behind us who have been down here since literally 10 a.m. And this is such a thrill for so many people to have the opportunity to witness this in person that they've been freezing down there for hours waiting for it to start.
And it started will in just a moment as the president is going down the east steps there. And we talked over on the broadcast network earlier about the perils of all of those stairs on a snowy, or what was a snowy day in Washington. That's one of the reasons that they spent so much time making sure that all the snow, as you can see, it's still on the grass there. It hasn't gotten that warm, but they've gotten the street sweepers out to make sure that people doing the traveling today will do so with the greatest of ease possible. The bands are playing, and it's all about to begin. Let's listen to the 55th inaugural parade. first presidential review of the troops for the new presidential term now complete. So it's time for a party. And in his fancy new 2006 Cadillac limousine, he'll head over to the parade route. Over here, they have just brought in the small buses. That's not to say anything about those who have made their way over here, just that their buses are smaller than the ones who came in earlier. They've gotten off, saw Karen Hughes just a moment ago, and lots of dignitaries, and they've all come with large bags. You hear the applause behind me, full of the swag that they got from their...
That was Karl Rove getting a big round of applause.
That was Karl Rove? All right.
It's just arriving here, and there was a big cheer from the crowd.
Of course, we're still watching over there where the president is, probably confusing the people at home. At any rate, the president, this has taken longer than I think it usually does, or than I thought it would.
Yes, I think they are a little bit behind the expected schedule. It seems to be a little more leisurely today. Perhaps the president spent more time shaking hands and visiting with members up at that luncheon in Statuary Hall, which would probably be a good idea because there's been a lot of tension between the two parties, and he knows that he's going to have to reach across the aisle on some of these big issues. There you see Vice President Cheney and a couple of his granddaughters. Looks like they're going to get a ride in the limo.
That's a fancy windshield there, isn't it? Why the hell the heck they did that? Look at that. You can't buy a caddy like that, not off the lot on East 57th Street.
See, Shep, if you're really something, you'd be going in that car to the Bush daughters' party tonight.
I'm telling you, sort of like probably Tony Snow will be doing. Tony Snow, host of the Tony Snow radio show on Fox News Radio, live with us from Washington now. Tony, that's a fancy car, isn't it?
That is a fancy car, Shep. You notice you even got your red and blue blinkers on the front. But, one of the things, I mean, it's always one of the fun things that they get new gear every time you have an inauguration as well. So you and I, being car nuts, are sitting around ogling the 2006 Cadillac, figuring out how they did this, whereas everybody else is trying to figure out what the parade's going to do.
Tony, you've written a share of speeches in your time. I thought that the one that was written today was brilliant and certainly sort of summed up what it is George W. Bush has been telling us is his mission since 9/11.
Yeah, an inaugural address really is a tone poem more than anything else, and what the president was trying to do was to set out a large theme under which he could encompass both domestic and foreign policies. And freedom is obviously the unifying issue, but there was a second issue as well that the president discussed at some length, and that is character. He talked about the American character, how Americans rise to the challenge, whether it be a tsunami or people who are oppressed abroad, and look for character also to emerge in conversations about how we treat one another at home. I'm certainly thinking that he's probably going to try to use that whenever possible to do some outreach to Democrats. This is a president who in both inaugural addresses has taken up the theme of unity. In both cases, of course, human nature has overwhelmed the desire for unity, both political parties jockeying for position. But it's going to be interesting. I think George W. Bush in this term is going to throw some pretty long balls when it comes to domestic policy. I think he's going to stretch both the imagination and sometimes the political courage of members of both parties, which for political junkies like me is just going to be wonderful. I think this is going to be a very interesting couple of years.
Tony Snow, live in Washington. Tony, good to talk to you. Be back to you in just a little while. Brian Wilson, though, has a much better vantage point today. Our correspondent, Brian Wilson, who was big at the boots and black tie ball last night, is you riding in the parade today or what, Brian?
I'm not in the last hay wagon on the way into town, but I'm in the next to the last hay wagon. That's the last hay wagon, and behind that hay wagon is the President of the United States and the official procession. We will actually in a moment do something that is known as the truck dance, and the trucks that are in this alignment will splay out in front of the president. We will actually be one of the first things you see as we go up the parade route, and if the president should choose to get out, we should be in a pretty good vantage point to see what's going on, see if he goes and shakes a few hands. But yeah, a wonderful vantage point. I got to tell you, of all the assignments I've had in Washington, this is one of the coolest.
Now wait a minute, Brian. You're going to be on a vehicle that trails the president and has all kinds of fancy equipment so that you can go live as the president's car goes down the road.
We'll be in front of the president. And he's
wow, that legal?
He's right here. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. There's a lot of Secret Service around. They seem to think it's okay. Right behind this truck is the official presidential motorcade, and in a moment the trucks will spread out so we can all get a decent shot of the president's limo as he makes his way up Pennsylvania Avenue.
Now, in years past, there have been times when the president would stop and shake a hand or two. I wonder in this new world if such a thing is even possible.
It's hard to know. We got a good look of him in the back of the limo just a moment ago as we passed in front of the Capitol, and he